I can share your project now.
Awesome, we'll do it. So would you like me to share my screen so that maybe I can show a picture of our game?
Yes, I think so. Okay.
All right. I believe you can see my screen, right?
Oh yes. Oh, yes, it's very cool. Let's start now.
Perfect. So hi, Karim. Hi, everyone. I'm Javier, the director of Dream of Darkness. Our video game is a Lovecraft and Aztecs adventure for PC. And we are exploring the historical context of when the Mexica, also called Aztecs, met the Spanish, the first contact. So it's a story-driven adventure with a bit of cosmic horror. Here we can see one of the important moments in our game. We are seeing moments after something related to the gods has happened in our capital, and our protagonist, Isabel Rodriguez, the first nurse of the West, tries to figure out what happened. So we are taking real events and adding a cosmic horror vibe. For example, this scary event did happen, and we're only adding a few elements like people floating, but you're seeing here the Mexica capital, how it used to look like in the 16th century. And this is where I currently live, in current Mexico City. So this is the kind of game that we're doing, and we're currently in pre-production. I cannot listen to anyone. Can anyone hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Right. So maybe Karim, you can also tell me a bit about you. I'm not sure what order would you like us to follow in our conversation.
Okay. Anyone can okay. Can you continue?
Karim,
Very cool art for me.
Karim?
Yes.
Maybe your connection is not good.
Oh, okay. Okay, I fix it.
Okay. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
By the way, Asikar, thank you for your comment. It's good that you appreciate the architecture. We made a few changes while we are taking the Templo Mayor, the main temple here that you can see in the background. We added, for example, these canals. Mexico City was something like Venice, Tenochtitlan, the Mexica capital. It had canals. People could explore the city and its surroundings via these canals. However, the real capital didn't have canals in this exact part of the city. We're just adding them so that even in the thick of the event that happens in the center of the capital, there's this option for players to, down the road, take the canals too, instead of having to go too far away in order to find the canals. Thank you, Hanum. I'm reading. Can't wait to play the demo. You can go to dreamofdarkness.com and you can already play the prologue. You can already join our newsletter and you can get new builds that we're developing. Our prologue was in 2D, was a storyboard, a visual novel. In order to learn very quickly from you, from players, what would you like to play first? Based on that, now we are developing in 3D, based on what we learned. Fathony growth. So it's canal out there. I agree with your opinion, sir. It's really good to have experience to enjoy the canal in the capital city. Absolutely. At least for me, maybe we can hear Abdul as well. In historical games, I like to take what is really exciting and maybe hasn't been explored enough in games and tweak a bit so players get more of the benefit. For example, with the Mexica, we are including their gods. Their gods are very interesting, different from the usual ones that we see from Greece, from the Norse mythology. So that's why we have these strange effects of people floating. We took what is known of these gods and incorporated it in our game. In the same way, the environment, as we described, we modified it a little so it's more fun, but always starting from what is known from history. So tell me, guys, would you like to for us to tackle a specific question, a topic? Happy to discuss with you. At the moment, I can listen to anyone.
Anyone can have question? Can you share video visiting Aztec and my video? I think.
I'm afraid, Karim, that I cannot understand you. I believe as Hagia was describing, maybe there's some problems with the connection. Hanum said, what's the address? Happy to write it here.
Okay. Yes. Can you share your video in when you're visiting the Aztec cities? It's very great video for me.
Sadly, Karim, there's a bit of noise still. I understand a few words, but then it gets cut off by the internet connection, I believe. How about we try on chat, like Hanum is writing too? Maybe you can write a comment there, and happy to respond on my end too. Sure, I can share that video.
I type. Okay.
So part of our process, I have read now your question, Abdul. Can you share your video when you visit the Aztec and Maya temple? Of course. So I just came back from visiting the Maya cities. We're also going to show other groups like the Maya and the Tlaxcalteca. So here you can see, let's begin with the Aztecs. So this very same place that I just showed to you, this is how it looks like today. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, I can see it.
Ooh, okay. I lost chat, but I hope it's not too much of an issue. So I will mute myself. I give an explanation. So that very same place that you just saw from our game, this is how it looks like today. This is the Templo Mayor. It was destroyed, and Mexico City was built on top of the Aztec capital. The lake was filled, and that's why Mexico City, many parts, are sinking because they are actually on top of water. I described there how sadly intense rains this year destroyed this ceiling that usually protects that part. This has been somewhat recently excavated. In the 80s, there was this restoration project because the remains of this temple were found. We have for a long time known that Mexico City is built on top of the former Mexica capital, but it was when the subway was built, and anytime there is construction going on, it's very easy to find these kinds of impressive buildings. So this has been the capital. Now, let's see the Maya cities. All right. Share screen. And again, I can mute myself. So this is Chichen Itza, one of the most impressive Maya cities. This is the temple of Kukulkan, of the feathered serpent. Maybe many of you have played Final Fantasy. In Final Fantasy VIII, Quetzalcoatl appears. So this god, Quetzalcoatl, is the name of the god in central Mexico. And this god was also inspiration for the Maya, and he appears as Kukulkan. He is the same feathered serpent. So in our process, in order to build our game, we first do our research, we read the books, we attend lectures by experts, but then we go deeper, and whenever possible, like on this trip, we go to the locations, to the archaeological sites. And finally, we also converse with players. This way we get both the experts, the knowledge of historians, of archaeologists, and we try to match it with players, because there is a risk. If, let's say, I only hear from historians, from archaeologists, we only take from these cities, from these real archaeological sites, the risk is that a game can feel like a history lesson. It can become too deep in history and perhaps not enough fun. On the other side, if potentially we just go with what I have in my mind or what potentially players may know, we're not experts of history. So that's how Age of Empires or some games that depict the Maya and the Aztec happen. They only repeat the same formulas, the same content, mostly depicting the Mexica, the Aztecs, and the Maya, almost the same with few differences. But this way we get the best of both worlds. The richness of each of the cultures by doing this process and intersecting them with what players want to see, hopefully. Great that you're enjoying it, Hanum.
Yes, I very enjoy it. How long do you visit this temple, Maya temple? Because I heard Maya temple in Yucatan, right?
Yes, this is in Yucatan, in the Yucatan Peninsula. Do you recall the meteorite that destroyed all of the dinosaurs? It landed there. So how long was I there? I was there 10 days, visiting different cities in the peninsula.
Very nice. Visit their temple. Very high, right? Very high.
It's huge. It is one of the tallest temples indeed in the world.
I see, I see. Okay. I heard you Nahuatl language in your game, right?
Indeed. So the Mexica spoke Nahuatl, as you mentioned, Karim, and we're including it in our game. It serves a few purposes. One is for players to really feel that they are encountering the Mexica. However, on the other hand, when we spoke with the Tlaxcalteca, that is the real enemies of the Mexica did not only fight the Spanish, they fought a lot of other groups at the same time. It was a big alliance. So the biggest players in the alliance were the Tlaxcalteca. And they were culturally similar to the Mexica. They both spoke the same language, Nahuatl. So when we spoke to a Tlaxcalteca today, a historian, she told us that sadly a real problem that the Tlaxcalteca have today is that their language, Nahuatl, is not taught at all. Well, it's not taught enough in schools. So in our game, we're including the Nahuatl language so that people can also practice it a bit. We're still exploring what is the best way in order to use Nahuatl, but so far in the dialogues is where you can see it, and in the loading screens.
It is very hard to add the language in your game.
Sorry, Karim, can you repeat or write that so that?
It is hard to add the Nahuatl language since they are not much Mexican can do Nahuatl, I think.
Indeed, it has its challenge. I don't speak Nahuatl, but fortunately, just this last week, after sharing a bit about the Maya trip that I was doing, a historian wrote to us and he speaks Nahuatl. So he is joining our team, and hopefully that can make it easier to add Nahuatl to our game. I'm also reading a comment from your audience, Karim. Fathoni wrote to us saying, my opinion, it's not really a problem to change history a lot in the game, because it's true. We need improvement and put a lot of change and making something new based the history background, so the game could be much fun rather than just following the history part. Absolutely, Fathoni. I believe that sometimes colleagues don't show history because it takes effort. It really requires work in order to show history properly. At the same time, I believe we can adjust things so history can be something more impactful. An example, we know that sadly the Mexica were destroyed, the Mexica civilization surrendered. So in our game, we are not having that as a certainty. Perhaps thanks to your decisions in our game, that can change. We'll see.
Can you hear my voice?
Yeah, Fathoni.
Okay, thank you, sir, for your feedback. And yes, I found out that mostly of the game today, that they just bring some kind of a little reference from history, but it's already fun. And I found out that your game with a lot of history background, especially for me, I love the history as my subject. I really love to find out and following your game story.
Thanks a lot, Fathoni. There are fortunately many people like you and me and many more who enjoy history. I believe that there are lots of contexts, lots of different periods and places that haven't been explored. Let's not only say in games, but even in movies, even in more mediums. So now that there is a saturation of World War II games, for example, and now that fortunately games are so competitive, that pushes us as developers to say, how can I compete? How can I make a fun game that stands out when there's Assassin's Creed, when there's God of War? So one way that we're trying to do that is by taking my love of history, our team's love of history, and applying it to a new context, and in this case, to the contact between the Mexica and the Spanish. But hopefully we can do that with more periods that are unexplored so far.
Yes, I think that's really cool. I'm really agree with your opinion, sir.
And I believe that is an opportunity for many of us developers, in case, like you described, Anthony, you are interested in history, you can hopefully someday develop your game with your preferred historical setting.
Thank you, thank you. I really hope to have contribution on developing such game.
It's definitely possible. Currently, well, it is always a challenge to create games. We have the best tools at the moment. With Unity and other tools, it is easier, not easy, but easier to develop our games.
And I think bringing the history lessons from Aztec and Mexico background, it's really good for today, because I found out that most the game that I play, it's really pretty rare to find out they bring some kind of from Mexico background. And mostly they just put in history based on 20th century, just like World War One, World War Two, but they didn't trying to bring this kind of history like Aztec. And I'm really hope that in the near future, there could be really a lot of game also bringing my Indonesian historical background or culture. So the people around the world could learn about our history and know about our identity of our nation. Yes, because of that, I think that your game will be really nice for the future content.
Thank you, Fathani. I hope so, definitely. And there is a great opportunity at the moment. Maybe you have all heard of this. In the games industry right now, there is a call for diversity, especially in the US, also in the UK, in Europe, and in the US, in Canada. So the people here, we are not in the US, and this is something that benefits us. Players want to see, and investors also want to see, games that depict these new places. Investors and players are almost, let's say, opportunistic about where a team is based. I could be, for example, work in Colombia and make a game about the Mexica capital. That's not an issue. But the content, like you were saying, Fathani, portraying the history of Indonesia, portraying the culture of Indonesia, the content that depicts something very different from the usual US, the usual European content, that is what is at the moment very hot, fortunately, for players. And we have to seize that opportunity. It's possible that in the next year or in not that long, a trend could appear that makes people forget this call for diversity. Javier is saying, making a good game definitely requires a lot of money. May I know how much money was invested in the game and where the funds come from? Great question, Javier. So at the moment, we are self-funded. So I would have to make the numbers. I don't recall at the moment exactly how much we have invested. But where can the money come from? I believe that is a more interesting conversation, but I will still reply where it's currently coming from. So in startups, we're also a game startup. There's something famous called the 3Fs, friends, fools, and family. So we're currently supported by people in our Patreon, by our family, who are excited about the opportunity of when we get invited to the UK to speak to historians, when we get invited to the US to speak at events, and they're currently funding us. At the same time, we want to get an angel investor. This is currently what we're working on. every game, every developer has to make choices about what kind of funding they want to get. Because to keep things simple, there are three kinds of support. So what I already mentioned, friends, fools, and family, that is your core network of people, your fans, always lean on them, because fortunately they believe in you even far before your vision, your pre-production is clear. So seize on that. It can be directly for funding, or it can be to get your first followers for your game, which is very necessary in order to stand out. After that, there is mainly publisher money, and there's venture capital. So on the publisher side, publishers, that is the traditional model for funding for games, they will invest in the product, not in the company. So I can pitch Fortunately Dream of Darkness, and if we're aligned, if they care about story-driven games, if they care about horror, if they have supported similar games in the past, and for the platform that we're working on, PC, then it is very likely that investment can happen. But we care more about funding for our company. So that's why we're looking for venture capital. Venture capital is the other side of the coin. They're, investing on the product, but they care much more about the company. Why do they care about the company? Because they want to support the company, the team, for a longer time. Publishers, they may invest in a game, and once that ships, they may no longer want to work with you. It is a relationship that can continue or can stop. While venture capital, angel investors, and VCs, they want to work with you together until there's an exit. And what can be that exit? An acquisition. So that is the kind of funding that we want. People who know about games and who want to support us for a longer period. Because we have to always plan for the worst case scenario. We all want our first game to be a massive success, but it is more realistic to always plan for the worst scenario. And in our case, is believing maybe the first game will be good, but it won't shatter the internet. But maybe the second or the third one. So that's why we want someone who believes in what we're doing and wants to join us for the long trip.
Can I ask how many people involved in this project from your team?
Sure. At the moment, Karim, we are 10 people with different degrees of responsibility. In a full-time basis, we are 2 teammates, and everyone else is either half-time or when we need them specifically. For example, our music composer. Happy to help, Javier.
For me, mostly I work to only one person, only me. But I have friend called Radin Agung making the good music for the game, my game. I will share my presentation later.
It is
Is there
hard.
any
Go ahead, Karim.
Okay, maybe I will presentation now.
That's it.
Anybody can see my share?
Yes, I can see a presentation.
Okay. Karim, go ahead.
This is my idea about making Sengkala Dev. Why I want to make historical game? Because there are no Indonesian game set in historical setting. The idea come when I still in high school. When I was high school, I think why there are no historical games set in Indonesia. So I want to try to make game some in February 7 years ago. And 1 year ago, 1 year later, I make studio called Sengkala Dev. With me and Raden Agung as composer, Sengkala Dev have developed several games from 26 years ago until now. Next child. So basically, history of Indonesia divided in 5 phases from my perspective: prehistory era, Hindu Buddha era, Sultanate era, colonialism era, and independence era. So in the colonialism era, there are colonialist perspective, saying the uprising from locals is rebellions. But when Indonesia got independence, the nationalists changed their perspective. Rebellions is hero and colonialist is villains. Next. So this is several my games. Starting from, if I use the timeline of history, Srivijaya Empire in 7th century until 11th century. This is that of Srivijaya. Currently I updating this game again. So, but in 15th century until 17th century, I developed game called Perang Laut Marti Warfare. Actually, this is the first game of Sengkala Dev, but I developed again in this year and has been released. Next. The foreign state of Bali is era where Balinese states have war each other in 19th century. This is my first Sengkala Dev game. I developed it called Dalusafal of Bali because many city-states in Bali fighting each others. And I call this is fall of Bali because Dutch come and take the advantage to conquer Bali. And in 1 year ago, I developed a game called Surabaya Inferno, set in revolution in Surabaya. Surabaya is a revolution city because Battle of Surabaya between Indonesia and allies mark as heroes' days and inspiring the Indonesian independence revolution, where the Indonesia got declared independence, but the allies arrived and want to allow Dutch to retake this country again. Next. So, editing history of Indonesia to strategy and a problem. Before I enter this history, become history student in Indonesia University, I only just a high school student, but and I want like the history, but I don't know how to put story in game. So basically, I don't know how to put history in game concept. So I just search history information in Google and put it in the main idea for my game. And this is why I don't know what the of history information. So basically, I just got one perspective. So one more writer, I just got one writer, not balanced from another perspective. But after I become a student student in history student history in Indonesia University in 6 years ago. I just know how to write the history in articles, and I think this can be sweet in how to make historical games. Next. So the methodology, I actually this is my idea, but I was putting games, how to make historical games. There are 5 phases. This is actually from historiography method in how to historian make make articles about history project. So the heuristic, gathering history source for the game. So such I use what book I use, what perspective I use, and something like this. But in later phase, I have certification. Certification is I certificate again. Is the source reliable for my projects and the terms? And the next phase is identification. Identificate again this source is actually reliable for my project or not. This same like previous phase, but it's different. And last is game development document. This is my book, my idea from all game idea, like how to the sprite concept, the game concept, and how put this idea project in a game. So basically, I use game development document and use historical element in this game development document before continue to development project. Next. So the example in Perang Laut Maritime Warfare, since the time of this game is very big, I can see if you know this game from most of Indonesia archipelago have many states and many playable factions. I use so many book reliable from this game theme. There are many themes from this game for this from Perang Laut. There are many themes like Majapahit, Sriwijaya, Aceh, and many kingdoms in Indonesia. So I must use many books, different books, but still same theme, maritime. I use also journals to support this project. And research field, it's actually research field. I just secondary objective. But actually, they are my research field in might come from my campus or from my forum, or I become a speaker like in Palembang. Next. Like it is the post when I visit Malacca, when I attend a World Open Forum in Malaysia 3 years ago in February. As you can see, it is a port of Portuguese port in Malacca and the Portuguese cannons. Next. This when I attend a speaker in Palembang, and I got field visit visiting to Musi River. Musi River is heartland of Sriwijaya Empire in 1 million century, 1 million ago. Next. So this example of how the historical campaigns in Perang Laut Maritime Warfare. I can see this is the battle, how like battle goings. Next. 15 to 12 campaigns, or I call it as Portuguese campaigns. It is set at a time when the rivalry between Tidore and Ternate in Moluccas become hotter. Tidore and Ternate is a main power in Moluccas archipelago because most of cloves and spices mostly controlled by them, and make this sultanate very rich. Portuguese, who search spices from to east, has reached Malacca in 1511, and 1 year later they arrived in Moluccas. But the Portuguese presence in Indonesia archipelago, they make a hot conflict between Sultanate of Demak from Java and Aceh from Sumatra, and make many wars in Malaccas and Java Sea. Several decades ago, later, there are Magellan expedition. Magellan expedition, you know, they are exploring the world first time, and after they got after Ferdinand Magellan got killed in Macatan in Philippines, they arrived to Tidore in Moluccas, and the Sultan of Tidore warmly welcomed them as the allies. The Spanish presence in Moluccas not so long. As you can see, there are many expeditions from New Mexico, New Spain in Mexico. So they're very related from the Aztec and Spanish conflict. Because after the Aztec fall, Spanish established New Spain, and they sent expedition to Moluccas from Pacific Ocean. The Spanish did not have long time in Moluccas because they are 30 of they are new 30 between Portuguese and Spanish. Spanish must leave from Moluccas and only have Philippines. In later time, they conquest Philippines. The campaign ended in 1570 when the Ternate became enemy of Portuguese. There are events when the Portuguese really heavily influenced in Sultanate of Ternate and killed the Sultan of Khairon. So Khairon got killed, and his son Babublo got revenge to Portuguese and banished Portuguese from Ternate and Moluccas after sieging the Portuguese port for many times until all the soldiers got hungry and surrender. Next. This is the map of new campaign of Dutch campaign. Next. The Dutch East Indies or POC is Dutch company role in Indonesia archipelago. They established in early 17th century, and in 1970 they got more stronger because the English with East India Company got decreased the influence because the VOC attacking the English trade company and also the Portuguese and the Spanish. But in Eastern Indonesia, the rivalry between Makassar and VOC. Makassar Sultanate is very strong at that time, and Dutch don't like Makassar, do not give their monopoly trade rights. Also for Banten located in West Java, and the hostility between VOC and Banten at the time very hot. Well, in the Western Indonesia, they are Aceh very strong at that time, and the conflict between VOC and Aceh not so strong as Portuguese in previous century. The campaign ended in 1670 when the Makassar got defeated again by VOC and allies in 1997. Basically, it's just a 40 years campaign, but of events at that time. Next. This is a map. This is a map of the campaigns in the OC campaign and the Portuguese campaign. Next. This is a ship models in a Perang Laut Maritime Warfare. I can see I also this ship, and this sprite like that in this game ship. Next. This is a unit model in a Perang Laut. So the soldier will represent the culture of each faction. Next. This is artwork from this game. So this make this game more better. And in loading scan, I use this art. Next. Here that of Srivijaya is only Sengkala Dev have money, budget money from Ministry of Education and Culture from the project called Facilitation Culture Project in 1 year ago. I never realized I can get this project, but sadly I just only asked 17 millions to this project. So basically very small because I never realized this project can selected. This project started in October 2020 and ended 1-2 months later. This research includes a historian from South Sumatra. Basically, it's my friends. And I also I searched many books about Srivijaya, like George Codes as the French archaeologists who focus in Southeast Asia archaeologists in 20th century. He give much information of Srivijaya Empire, also of many kingdoms in Southeast Asia. But sadly, there are lack of information about Srivijaya before 1683. As well as a flag, I don't know how to make a flag of each kingdom. So basically, I represented from how these kingdoms like in before and how the local province like now. The emblem of local province. I adapted it. In short time, making big strategy game is not so easy, especially in 2 months. So this game, when I realized this game, it still have many bugs and have bad quality. Next. This previews the graphic. And next. This is archaeology map I got from the George Codes books. Next. It is a Srivijaya Empire influence in Sumatra and Malaya Peninsula. Next. This is the output of Srivijaya. Next. Next. In this month, I recorded again the data of Srivijaya project to fix the representation of this game. Next. This is a new screenshot of this game. Next. Oh, next. Next. Thank you. Anybody got a question?
I have a question, Karim.
Yes, yes.
So you were mentioning that you're continuing development. There are naturally different ways to create games. So it is great that you're giving updates to the games that you already have, I believe, on Steam. Do you have a specific objectives in mind now that you are continuing development on these games that are already on the stores?
I think this game is have a different concept, similar concept to other games. But with Southeast Asia, especially in Indonesia archipelago, this make this game more interesting. But unfortunately, not support from the quality. So because I can see I have like a budget from this game, but I try to make this game more better quality to make this game more have growing the community.
I understand. Thanks.
Okay. So I think the concept like Earth, I think not, because it's a concept basically from a grand strategy game. So I make the grand strategy, but set in Southeast Asia, especially in Indonesia archipelago. I have background from the history department, so I know much about how history like, and I think it's lot of history contents can make in game, especially in Indonesia archipelago. I think I just know how to execute, but still learn how to make game execute it in a game.
I think that I have question for Mr. Karim
Yes.
and Mr. Javier also. Is there any possibility for Mr. funding from government by improving the game based on historical and cultural background? Because I think it increasing of is there any possibility? Good question.
Like I was writing, Anthony, I'm afraid I didn't understand your question because there was apparently an issue with the connection. Could you maybe write it down? Happy to answer.
Okay, I'm sorry for my internet connection, sir.
No worries. I'm pretty sure that I'm also guilty of this because we're in opposite sides of the world.
Yeah.
It happens.
but how about my voice now? It's really clear, so I could
Yeah,
be
at the moment it is clear. Maybe you can just repeat what you said.
okay. It's if there any problem, please tell me again, sir. Okay, my question is there any possibility to have a fund from the government, official government, to support your game? Because this type of game that bringing an historical background of the country and the city and the culture, it could be help to increase the profit of the tourism of each country. So is there any possibility to have this kind of funding from official government by of these reasons? That's my question, sir.
Yeah, great question, Anthony. And it makes sense. It is logical, as you were saying. If games based on historical context get out there, then tourism and other industries of that country will be benefited. So usually governments don't support games. Most countries don't support games. Naturally, there are exceptions. So in our case, I'm sure Karim can also say that his own experience, but in our case, we won Mexico's Innovation Award and it had some money, but I wouldn't recommend it. Specifically, that fund that applies for Mexicans, it was very bureaucratic. Usually, funds by the government, since they are not designed by game developers or people who know how to run companies, they are not designed to help you as a developer to work better. They are only, as people say in the US, they're only covering their asses. That is, they're only looking to comply with their rules, the government rules. So in our case, it was very bureaucratic and it actually slowed us down immensely. Eventually, we regretted getting that money because we could have done better work without that. There are interesting exceptions. For example, Canada and the UK, they know their government also has funds for game companies and they have better programs than what I experienced. However, I have heard this from my colleagues in Canada. There is a risk, even in countries like this, of taking money from the government. And that is, you could build your game, but be somewhat relaxed about finding an audience because you have government money to support you building your game. The risk, the threat that this causes with Canadian colleagues who take money from the government is that they release their game, but they never learn how to sell their games. So when the government money runs out, they don't have a Discord going, they don't have 1,000 followers, they don't know how to continue their game because you don't want to release a game. Hopefully you want to sell that game, you want to create more games. So they depend on the government and they have to apply again in order to get more money from the government. To make a long story short, while there can be government money, it is more convenient, especially in the medium term, to get private money, because what you want is to have success in the market. The market should be the one that believes in your game, that gives you money because of the game that you're making, and not because you are complying with the rules of the government.
I see. So okay. There's a lot of issue. I see, and I also understand that the governments in each year could be changed, right? It could be change of the
Absolutely.
who manage the government, and it could be affect the the decision from the government to support to continue the program or not. And yes,
Totally
I think
true.
every game need to be having personal profit despite by the funding of the government or other
Exactly.
so they could manage. I see. Thank you, Mr. Jovian, for your answer.
Happy to
In my
help.
case,
And I want to hear what Mr. Karim. Yes.
in my case, I use a facilitation project. This project must have clear how I use the budget clear, and when I use the money, I must have the recipe. So is it quite bureaucratic? And later, after I release game, I must have a hard copy recipe on all what I use is money. How I in each day how this game work. So it's quite bureaucratic, but I see its game is quite. They just quietly sport this game, and I in my, last year ago I approached in national TV telling this project to national television in Zoom meeting also. Uh, this but it is from the Ministry of Education. This is project is non-profit. It's different from the other ministry like Ministry of Creative. They give money, but this only for the company, legal company. So I cannot join this project. I heard several my friends has joined this project from the Ministry of Creative. They got money, but they must do what from the list of the budget used. So they use it from the to financing the to pay the employee and for this the project. This is make me jealous for them. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Karim. And I think that the responsibility for giving a proposal about a program, it could be also hard with facing the bureaucratic government system that I know in Indonesia. I hope that in the future content, Mr. Karim game could have funding from the government, so it could be run better in the future. Thank you, Mr. Karim.
Thank you. Is there any question again from the audience?
I'd love to hear from the audience. Are you guys students working on your own games? Are you currently in an undergraduate degree related to games? I'd love to hear from you.
Any question?
Maybe it's too early in the morning in Indonesia.
I
I know that on my end it's very late. Go
it is
ahead,
now-
Karim.
If let sun has rising now. It is nearly 10 a.m. in
Very
Jakarta.
early.
No, not suddenly.
It's
quite hot
holiday
now.
actually. It's holiday, so people are actually enjoying their holiday maybe
I can imagine.
rather than we personal for me as a student, I'm really tired to have Zoom meeting in every works. Because of that, I prefer to enjoy my holiday out from the internet actually and out of work. Actually, that could be why the participants are really not much today, in my opinion.
No worries, it happens.
In US there are many historical student and lecture focus in a game, right? In historical game network.
I had audio issues again, sorry Karim, but I believe you mentioned that in the US there are a lot of people interested in history or developers interested in history.
I think US very hardcore games because in every time I see in Steam stat there are many US players.
Well, the US has the best of both worlds. On one hand, there's a lot of players, there's a lot of competition, but at the same time, they have a lot of funding. So personally, I like to take what works from each country. Many of you may know that it is possible, fortunately, to get investment from the US, either from a publisher or from venture capital, even though we may not be based there. It takes a lot of work, but it is possible.
I see. I see there are many players, their lecturer and professor focus in a historical games right now. I see. In historical game network.
It is fortunately something that is growing, right, Karim? I was very excited when I discovered the HGN, this historical games network, and it can benefit both developers like people here and players, but allies that I hadn't imagined until I discovered the HGN is academics. Academics, people who study games professionally, can be great both players and also people who make big questions that can make our industry improve. For example, as you know, Karim, many players expect, as you were describing in your presentation, a degree of quality in the finished game. And something I have appreciated a lot about the HGN and academics is that they care a lot about how a game is made. They want to see earlier stages than usual. And when you share the different interventions that the Dutch, that the Portuguese happened, this can be very interesting for academics who study games, because they love to see how this process happens, how developers adapt history into a game. While many players, they only want to see the release title, the finished title. They may not necessarily want to see this process. So it's great, at least it is for our title at the moment, to engage a lot with the HGN, because they are early adopters and they recommend, fortunately, games that do this process right of adapting history into games.
I see the other Aztec games again, in the Aztec game, another is in the Aztec game. I see in Steam.
Fortunately, it's something that people are interested in, and more games are appearing with this setting. There have been for a long time a few games with Aztec setting. For the biggest, most important one is Age of Empires, like I mentioned. But it is definitely accelerating now. More games are appearing. In your case, Karim, I believe yours may be very original, because I haven't seen many games set in the history of Indonesia, right?
Yes, I see there are lack of historical games from Indonesia, especially in strategy games. That's why they are Spanish professor are learning about my game.
Oof, I'd love to see more about this period, because what you were describing of the Dutch being active there, the Portuguese, it was definitely an international setting. In contrast here, for example, once the Spanish arrived, they seized all of this, and not other European countries could intervene, at least not as directly. But in your case, for a game, it sounds very interesting that you have presence of a lot of different countries, especially for a strategy game.
Yeah, the Southeast Asia is very very popular from ancient times. So that when the Portuguese arrived, the locals have already know how to use gunpowder, but it's not so good as a Portuguese.
Mm. Yes. Have you chatted with Portuguese players?
No.
They're very cool.
Yes, in Europe they are players from German or French or UK mostly. I see in my game.
There's sizable populations of players, of communities of players from these countries that you described. In our case, we've had our game also covered by a Portuguese streamer, and they are very cool. They are very curious. They say sorry for colonialism, and I tell them it's okay. It's centuries ago. You didn't do it, I know. They're very cool players, the Portuguese too.
Portuguese. Oh, see. Because,
Mhm.
okay. You know, in that Australia, I also use a native language like a ancient Japanese from matter. Ancient Japanese is very language very different from nowadays Japanese language, and I use also a Sundanese language, ancient Sundanese language, very different from now, and it is very hard to go because I must read inscription, inscription and the letters.
Mm,
Very hard.
I can imagine.
Very nice. And then the voice actor can speak it, how to pronounce it, because he learned also from the priest, Hindu priest, how to interpret ancient Japanese language. It's very different from now. If Japanese now interpret it, they may probably have wrong dialects. I think it's similar with civilization when they use a Japanese language in Gajah Mada in Civilization 5.
Languages can be a lot of fun, and it's good that we are exploring them more. Japanese definitely is an opportunity. That's why the recent move of more Japanese companies becoming indies, because for the longest time the Japanese game scene was dominated by big established companies like Nintendo and Sony, and now more independent companies doing and showing Japanese culture is super interesting. For example, I loved how in Persona the coffee culture of Japan can be seen. So I appreciate language, but I appreciate how other smaller nuances of each country's culture can be appreciated. In this case, Japanese coffee culture. I am a big coffee fan.
Okay. Okay. I see you are also the speaker in January, right? In online event in speakers. I see the events, online events.
Yeah, the Historical Games Network, as you know, Karim, fortunately has been well received. So since we did a panel with them, we were invited by the University of Sunderland in the UK. They have a society, the Multiplay Society, that gets together developers like we're here with academics and players. So I'm going to speak in their event about diversity, about what I was describing, about more contexts, more characters, not the usual European white dude with a sword.
I see, because they are in last years ago they are from Rock Shotgun. They are right about my games, about the history ignored by American and European studio.
Yeah,
Ignored.
and I understand why this has happened. For a long time, it has been very expensive. It is still expensive to make games, so that didn't allow many of us to potentially depict other contexts. Now, fortunately, with the internet and more tools, more of us can enter into the games industry and show our contexts that we find interesting. But there's also another thing, and that is that our medium is very young. So it makes sense that, let's say, books, since books have been around for over 2,000 years, it makes sense that there's a lot of content, a lot of settings. Movies are a younger medium, but they still appeared in the 20th century. So it makes sense that there's a lot of context in movies. And in our case, we're in that moment where we're demanding more of our industry. And hopefully this explosion of seeing the history of Southeast Asia, seeing the history of the Americas, that can fortunately get more people interested in showing more and more periods, especially if players respond positively to our games.
Yes. You see, there are a lot of element in the history, probably not so see by local developers because they mostly heavily influenced by another developers in for outside like a Japanese or American. So they are probably want to stick like that, but combining with the local culture like a horror concept.
Absolutely. The more that we see references like our games, and the more that people think, oh, so it's possible to combine horror and it's possible to combine strategy. And sadly, there are many developers who, let's say, only engage with our industry. So there's a lot of, I see a shooter, let's say, so I as a developer play shooters, I see shooters, so I mostly repeat the formulas. And in order to get new ideas in our industry, like you're doing, Karim, you actually have to do the research. You actually have to read the books, engage potentially with a university, and only that way, these new ideas that may have not been explored in Halo, in Call of Duty, arrive and people discover, oh, the Dutch were active here, or the Portuguese were active here, even if no other game has shown it before.
Yes, I see. You know, they are when I explained about Spanish expedition to Moluccas, they are relative from Hernan Cortes. Alvar Hernan Cortes relative joined this expedition to Moluccas when he became a fishery in New Spain in Mexico. Very related.
It is impressive how New Spain, as you discovered, had an impact all the way to Southeast Asia. I had a call with a director of the Philippines, a colleague who is based in the Philippines, and he told me that centuries ago, when the Philippines was part of the Spanish Empire as a colony, some decisions were taken all the way here in New Spain. That is the name that Mexico used to have, New Spain. Can't you imagine an ocean away and you had to wait until the ship from Mexico arrived all the way to the Philippines to give the news of what a government office had decided? It's crazy, but it would be great material to show that in a game, potentially.
Yeah, very related because when Spanish conquered the Manila, they conquered again the Philippines. They also try to conquer Moluccas, but sadly they are for Moluccas under Sultanate of Ternate has united and expelled many Spanish expeditions until 16 early 17th century because Babur has died and the Spanish used many soldiers to conquer Ternate and they conquered Moluccas with a Portuguese help because at the time the Philippines had because Spanish and Portuguese because one crown, so this they got help from Malacca, but sadly they are Dutch at the time, so Ternate helped that asked Dutch to help them, so Dutch will get monopolized in Moluccas and Dutch reduce the Spanish presence in Moluccas. If they don't do that, probably Spanish will conquer Eastern Indonesia and probably like Philippines like now.
Wow. So it is a great decision like you're doing to use the strategy genre in order to show how potentially different groups were fighting for power, right?
Yes. It's also in Spanish colonialism in Indonesia not so much talked because the source is Spanish and in Indonesia nobody can speak Spanish except the expert. This is very hard to speak Spanish. When I see Portuguese language, oh, what is it?
Yeah, there are differences, but fortunately, by reaching out to experts, sometimes you discover allies. We have emailed historians, emailed archaeologists, and sometimes when they have the time, they reply and are very kind. We learn a lot from their advice.
For me, I asked directly to my lecture, what is it? Or another department, asked it, what is it? So but mostly they are warmly welcome how to help me sometimes.
Yeah, we have to help each other. In the case of developers, we can always present ourselves as being very honest. Hey, I am doing this indie game, like we were saying, with my own with our own resources, and maybe an university can be interested in supporting you, perhaps a government office, but like we already described with Fathlony, we have to be careful about that. There are a lot of allies who wants to help an entrepreneur, an artist, an entrepreneur who is trying to do something better. Fortunately, is someone that a lot of people want to help. Not all the time, you can't assume that, but a lot of allies appear in the games industry.
Yes, yes. In I guess like that. Sometimes I must struggle in a financial problems in making these games.
Yeah, and that's why we have to ask for investment, look for investment. In our case, we have discovered that it takes around 6 months since the moment that an investor says yes until the money is actually in your bank. So we have to pitch far before we need the money. It is sometimes hard to imagine that. Sometimes we think until I run out of money, then I should start pitching. But then you're not pitching an opportunity. You're pitching your need. You're pitching a problem. I don't have money in order to make my game. And on the side of investors, they don't want to hear your problems. They want to hear opportunities. They want to hear it is possible to earn X amount of money if you pour money into this opportunity. And that can only happen if you're not truly desperate. But if you are in a relaxed state of mind, in a focused state of mind, and then you can actually pitch an opportunity.
I see, I see. Okay. Is there any question from audience? Any question from audience? Because there are a lot of audience now.
Hello. Can
What's up, Tabala? Tell us.
give my opinion?
Sure.
So personally love playing video games. I play a lot of it since I was a child. I was still a children. And I usually love historical games. Like, the first game I play, still remember, it's Call of Duty 2. It's make me love history still. Now I'm a history student at University of Indonesia. Now there is a game that I really love. The historical concept makes me feel like I was live in that era. You may heard of Kingdom Come Deliverance. I play that game. Its settings in Prague, around the dark age of Europe. In Prague, I remember our characters. We live as a lowly characters from a blacksmith family. We learn how to use sword, how to read a book. But what makes me feel really special about it, there's one times that you have to sneak in church to kill a person. The person have atoned. He's a good person now, but that's his deed in the past cannot be forgiven. You have a choice to kill him or not. So I choose to release him. But while I was roaming in the church, there's the library. In the library there is a there's a shelf full of forbidden knowledge, and it was locked for good reason. Yes. And when the night time comes, I sneak up on that shelf and I open what in that shelf. As it turns out, it was the book of Persian doctor. I kind of forget his name. I kind of forget his name. Who's the doctor?
No worries.
The best, I don't know, the revolutionary of medical from Persia. I kind of forget his name. He is
Avicenna, potentially.
Yeah, Abdul Sina. Yeah, it was his
nice.
book.
I admire a lot that philosopher. So you find a book by him. Nice.
Yeah, in a forbidden knowledge section of the church.
Makes a lot of sense. For a long time.
On that time, Dark Ages, where Islam in its peak of civilization, and Europe was kind of, church, very theological, everything, and the Pope said, and no, it's kind of make me feel like it's kind of open world game, RPG, but yeah, it's good game. I know it's not easy to make, but yeah, it's making me feel like I was there. I was in that era, playing that, being that person, give the pictures of how life in that era looks like. So that's my opinion for now. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Sounds very interesting. I'd like to play now this game now that I know that Avicenna is there, even Sina. And I have heard that on that particular game, a lot of attention was put into history. It is good that, as you say, there was this forbidden knowledge that apparently was included in this library, so that you feel even more that you're really in Prague, in medieval Europe. That is such a great power of games. One definition that I've heard of our medium is that it is also the art of thinking and doing. So if we are in a setting that invites us to feel like a knight in European Middle Ages, that can potentially help us as well to identify, well, the problems of the era, empathize with them. I hope that games can gradually become empathy machines at some point.
Is there any question again from a new audience? Yes, there are new audience here. First time I took know Aztec is from Age of Empires 2. First time I know Aztec and Maya from Age of Empires 2. I explored it in Civilization 4. This time I know what is Aztec.
A lot of
And
people
Spanish.
have discovered in the world the Aztecs thanks to Age of Empires 2. So while they have a few problems, I recall that they described the Aztec as, oh, they were too violent, and that's why they fell. Their neighbors were tired of the Aztec being so violent. That is a colonial myth. Still, it is great that people discover this civilization thanks to games.
Yes. Yeah, Aztecs. But I see the similar case in Aztec, like in Indonesia, like in Minahasa. When the Spanish arrived in Minahasa in North Celebes, they are visit and they are trading, but sometimes they are go war with local tribes. But the Spanish failed because most of Spanish soldiers go beheaded by the local warriors. And when they time again, Dutch already come again, and Dutch help Minahasa fight against the Spanish. This is some case like in North Celebes. Minahasa like they are enemies, and they're probably like tribal tribes use a skull like there and frighten the enemy with a beheaded head in a beach to speak scary enemy.
Wow.
Yeah, like of information about that, but there are some historical export tell about history of Minahasa peoples and Spanish at that.
Impressive. It is absolutely enjoyable to continue learning of our intersection of history and games, because there's so many possibilities.
Yes, they are Spanish and Portuguese activity in Indonesia archipelago because before Dutch came and monopolizing it. When
Wow.
Dutch arrived, they are not only Dutch, they are Germans at there because there are several governor general is Germans actually.
Oof. At least myself, I would have never suspected this until you mentioned it, Karim.
Yeah, there are many unexplored history like that, like Germans because governor general of Dutch East India Company. They are samurai. They are samurai in Indonesian archipelago and help a company to beheaded many peoples because
Whoa.
in Moluccas archipelago there are islands called Banda Islands, and in that time is 1621 the the Dutch East India Company decide to genocide most of indigenous Banda, and most of workers is samurai beheaded and put new self to work in plantation.
How impressive.
So impressive. Yes, this the history in from Moluccas, the Banda Islands, because they only nutmeg in world only discovered in that islands. So VOC Dutch East India Company very greedy to exploit it and control the production. Is
Wow.
colonialism behavior.
Hmm. You have a lot of content that fortunately you can build.
Yes, there are many contents, but the problem is how can we execute it and how can we get funded is main problem from local developers.
I
Mostly,
believe
I
like
think
you're doing by describing it at the moment, but it definitely has to be heard by investors. And
yes,
in games, there's an additional benefit in contrast with regular investors. I also worked before games with the oil industry doing virtual reality. So investors in games, even if they may say no, they will give great feedback. So everyone can benefit from pitching to investors early instead of waiting until the game is more advanced. Oh, no. Fortunately, many game investors now are more experienced and they understand that all games, even AAA games, they all start as simple, small prototypes that can be improved later on, but that naturally require the resources of investors in order to improve. More and more investors understand this.
you see. You see the from European perspective, there are many wrong perspective to like Aztec and Indonesian archipelago at the time. Like you have found Hernan TV series or Conquer's TV series. I see they are TV series interpret how the Aztec and Spanish at the time.
Oof, so many interpretations possible, fortunately. On my end, it is getting a bit late. Especially I'm tired since I flew in from the Maya cities that I shared with you. So maybe we can stay in touch in case anyone wants to follow up, has another interesting question. Happy to help you guys to have success with your games.
Yes, yes. Okay. Oh, I still know Mayans from the movie from Mel Gibson. Apple Pipe.
Apocalypto, oh, terrible movie. Yeah,
Terrible movie.
maybe we can close commenting that. Maybe we can close the call by commenting that. So it is a movie about supposedly the Maya, but it shows the Maya as somewhat savage people who are celebrating sacrifices as the most important thing, and that they happen very violently and in very public display. So sacrifices did happen. That is a fact. But they were not as important in Maya society as that movie portrays it. At the same time, the movie has some benefits. For example, you can hear Maya. I don't recall if it's Yucatec Maya. There are different languages that the Maya spoke. Each city was different. They were city-states. But the Maya that you can hear from the movie, that is actually well-researched Maya. And that is one of the best representations of the Maya languages. But the content, as always, could have been improved if they had an advisor or they had done the research like we have described in our processes.
Because when I see Apple Pipe, I see Mayans. Oh, like it is. Because I don't know much about Mesoamerica culture. Only from books and games and TV series. But the books from about is very like in here, Aztec in Mexico. Mostly it's world history books about Aztec and Maya.
Yeah,
But
from books we can learn a lot about the periods and with the nuance that sometimes movies or games don't necessarily have.
yes, the problem is people can read this book or not, because sometimes books have many texts and people can easily bore it if they don't like it.
Absolutely. Yeah, the public may not be as interested sometimes in a very thick history book. In that sense, people who are focused on books or documentaries that are focused on making history more accessible are very necessary. For example, on our site, there's a website called Mexicolor. If you Google in English things about the Aztecs, many times you will find Mexicolor in the top result. They're a fantastic resource because you can find almost about any topic about the Aztecs, a very brief article, but that is well researched. So for many historical periods, I believe there are these organizations that communicate, summarize the findings of experts. Those can be used by developers like ourselves.
Yes, yes. Is there any comments from the audience? It's nearly 1 hour 90 minutes we're talking, right?
Yeah, it's been a while. So maybe we can
close discussion.
maybe we can wrap up, Karim, as I described, because it is somewhat late on my time zone, but it has been very interesting to hear from your game and chat with your audience.
Yes. So now I currently working in the Australia again, updating this game quality and asking about how to make it, how to improve this quality of game. So in Steam, this game have bad reputation, but I want to fix it because it is free game. Also, if my players play it and with better quality, maybe this will be new community for Sengkala Dev, and they will probably keep following Sengkala project later. This is what I thinking about it now. About community.
Well, best of luck, Karim. Indeed, community is a challenge, but by improving the quality like you have in mind, that can absolutely happen, getting a following.
Yes, yes. This is challenge because I see the community, engage the community is my main solution for me from now, because if they just pay but don't play, they probably will short advantage but not advantage and later, because they new players do not come. But if they playing and review it, they will not new player come and will advantage me as developers.
So many opportunities. So based on what we described, maybe we can wrap up because I really have to go to sleep after a long flight. But I really sorry, Karim.
You just arrived in Mexico City right now. Very sorry to hear it.
No, on the contrary, happy to help. I believe it was the best to just wrap up the trip, the Maya trip, and chat about it with you guys. You were the very first to see this video.
Okay, maybe we can close it now. Miss Raisha, can you close it? We have photo moments.
Okay. Anybody can close the video?
Let's start video.
Okay. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
for
you
the
for
invitation.
visiting. Thank you for attending this discussion, Mr. Ryan.
Happy to meet you, Karim, and to meet everyone.
Everyone, maybe we can have this discussion again like this, but with another developers, because there are many developers make historical games from another world.
Oof, absolutely. It is an ongoing movement that will only get cooler, more fun.
Yes, because each other can learn from another country and learn how to. Sometimes we have not experience. We will share to another developer, especially makes game developer focus in a historical games like me.
We learn from each other. So
Yes.
see you around, Karim. See you around,
Yes.
everyone. Take
Thank
care.
you. Thank you.